Hello, my friend. Today I bring you another lost legend from the depths of Middle-earth. Close your eyes, feel the magic surround you. Our journey begins. The wind over Dagorlad was a slow mourner. It moved not as wind does in kinder places, but as something broken, dragging itself across the blasted plain. What once had been green and wide in the elder days now lay beneath a grey hush. No birds wheeled there, no deer wandered near its edge. It was a land shaped by memory and stained with silence, where each stone seemed a tomb and each gust of air a whisper from long-buried bones. The plains stretched vast and empty beneath the bruised sky, bordered to the south by the dark eaves of the dead marshes, and to the north by the looming teeth of the Ifil Duath. Here, long ago, the last alliance had clashed with the hosts of Mordor. Here, Elendil fell and Gil-galad burned, and the shadow that was Sauron had staggered for a time, broken but never dead. And now, once more, the ground began to murmur. It was not a sound for ears, but for the bones, a subtle unease that pressed into the soul. No birdsong dared break it, no sunlight warmed it. The stars above Dagorlad, when they could be seen, appeared pale and distant, as though they too had turned their faces away. Far to the west, beyond the borders of Ithilien, even in the havens of Imladris and the halls of the White Tower, those attuned to the old ways began to feel it. A weight returned to the air, a scent of rot beneath the soil, a silence that throbbed like a bruise. The wise did not yet name it. They spoke in riddles and half-thoughts, reluctant to wake old names best left sleeping. But in the woods of southern greenwood, not yet called Mirkwood, the leaves trembled when no wind stirred. Pools turned black as ink, creatures fled without sound, and though it was midsummer, the trees bore no new blossom. The world was turning again. Some among the elves, with memories longer than the line of kings, whispered of shadows rising not from the east, but from beneath. Old spirits stirred by forgotten blood, summoned not by trumpet or blade, but by longing and pride. The peace that had held since Isildur's day was no peace at all, but only quiet before another fall. Atop a high place in the Emin Mool, a lone figure stood, robed in grey, staff in hand, eyes troubled beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He had stood there before, centuries ago, when all the world had wept fire and fate had clashed in the valley below. Now he watched again, and the watching brought no comfort. "Dagorlad," he murmured, "the battle plain, and what ghosts wake now?" His voice was low, like the earth cracking in winter. He was Gandalf the Grey, called Mithrandir among the elves, though few used his name lightly. To many he was a wanderer, a pipe smoker, a teller of tales, but to the wind and stone, he was something far older and far more troubled. He knelt and pressed his hand to the ground. Beneath his palm, the earth was warm, warm. The stone remembered fire. A crow passed overhead, black against the failing light, and turned east, its wings cleaving the dusk. Gandalf's gaze followed it, toward a rising column of cloud where no cloud should be. It coiled above the horizon like breath from an unseen mouth. "Then it begins again," he whispered, and he turned south, toward Greenwood's edge, toward Dol Guldur, though he did not yet speak its name, and began to walk, each step slower than the last, as if he felt the eyes of ancient things shifting behind him. The plain of Dagorlad fell behind, but its silence lingered in his cloak and hair, a weight he could not cast off. The battle had never truly ended, not in the stones, nor in the hearts of men. And now the land itself remembered. So too must he. For not all wars are fought in fire. Some are born in silence. And it was from silence that the shadow rose. Greenwood the Great had many names in many tongues, but none captured its heart. To elves, it was once Gil-galad, the wood of green leaves, a vast and proud forest stretching from the mountains of mist to the river running. Its boughs had sung with light in the elder days, a golden breath upon the world. But now that breath had grown still in places, and its heart no longer beat in joy. Gandalf walked beneath its canopy, slow of pace, his grey cloak brushing ferns that trembled without wind. The high branches above, once filled with birdsong, now loomed silent and watchful, like sentinels carved in greenstone. Shafts of sunlight pierced the gloom in places, but they fell pale and thin, filtered through leaves grown heavy with shadow. There was unease here, a presence not seen but sensed. It stirred not like beast nor hunter, but like memory, old and unsettled, creeping like mist between the trunks. The old trees knew. They had stood for 1,000 years and more. They remembered the laughter of elven children, the battle cries of dwarves, the quiet tread of entwives now lost. They whispered still, not in speech, but in rustling groan and creaking bark. And what they whispered chilled even Gandalf's spirit. Something had returned. It was not yet named, not yet crowned or robed, but it moved nonetheless. A murmur in the soil, a breath upon the leaves, a whisper caught between the branches that none dared answer. As he moved deeper, the forest changed. The trees pressed closer. Thorned vines curled like fingers across the path. Mushrooms large and pale sprouted beneath twisted roots. The smell of rot, faint but growing, clung to the air like damp wool. Gandalf stopped beside a great oak, its trunk split by age and lightning. He placed a hand upon it, not for support, but communion. What do you feel, old one? What creeps beneath your roots? No words came in answer, but the silence grew louder, a stillness that throbbed. And then he heard it, far off, barely discernible, a sound like breath, or weeping. Gandalf turned. Behind him, nothing moved, but the trees had shifted. He knew this place, or thought he did, yet the path behind him seemed changed, darker, narrower, as if the forest disapproved of his memory. He felt a pressure then, soft but sure, as though unseen eyes were watching. He pressed forward, through bramble and fallen stone, through moss-draped arches where once ancient paths had run. Here, deep within Greenwood, were ruins, elvish by the carvings, now worn and weeping sap. A broken fountain stood in the clearing, choked with ivy and black water. He remembered this place. Long ago, a company of sylvan elves had gathered here in revel and song. He had come then as a guest, a friend of Thranduil's father, Orifer. The woods had been bright then. The stars had danced through the leaves. Now the stars were gone. From the shadows behind the fountain, a figure stepped. It was not tall, nor armed, nor fair. It wore a robe the color of dead ash and moved like smoke, barely stirring the undergrowth. Its face was hidden, its hands long and still. But Gandalf felt its gaze, piercing, searching, old. "Do you remember me?" the figure asked. Its voice was not cold. It was worse, familiar. Gandalf stood unmoving, though his staff grew warm in his hand. "I remember many," he said quietly, "but not all that return are welcome." A silence fell between them. The figure stepped no closer, but behind it, The trees sighed, not in relief, but in resignation. The whisper was growing now, louder than wind, though the leaves did not move. Words crawled in the air. Ash Nazg Durbatuluk. The black speech, faint, fragmentary, echoing where no tongue had spoken it for centuries. Gandalf gripped his staff tighter. "You serve him," he said. "Even here, even now." The figure tilted its head. "I serve what must return." And then it was gone. No sound of step, no rustle. The forest swallowed it whole. Gandalf stood alone in the clearing. But something had changed. Beneath his boots, the moss was dying. The trees above seemed to lean closer. The fountain bubbled once, and a black ripple spread outward. He turned away. There would be time to name what stirred. But for now, he must hasten, not with fear, but with sorrow. He had glimpsed what many still denied. Greenwood was no longer whole, and the whisper in the trees had become a voice, like a great cloth of shadow unfurling from unseen heights. The dusk deepened into blackness so complete that even starlight flinched. Owls gave no cry. Foxes and deer fled the lower paths, and amid the hush, only the sound of hooves, muffled and unhurried, marked the passage of a single rider beneath the looming boughs. He wore grey and shadow both, though neither by choice. The cowl of his cloak lay low, revealing hair silver as hoarfrost, caught in the wind. His eyes, beneath brows etched with age and thought, burned soft and steady. He rode a horse of Númenórean line, white as cloudlight, tireless and swift, though now it walked at a pace suited more for thought than flight. Gandalf rode, alone, as he often did when the world turned. Behind him, the glade lay empty, save for the echo of that vanished voice and the memory of words long cursed. Ahead, the path twisted through sleeping trees, their roots thick and hungry. The forest bent close as if eavesdropping, not hostile, not yet, but curious and deeply aware. The wizard's breath misted in the cooling air, though no frost yet claimed the fern. His staff rested against the saddle, runes faintly glimmering in the gloom. A small bundle of herbs hung from the pommel, not for spell or charm, but as offering. The old magic, the deep magic, respected gifts more than force. As he passed beneath a natural arch of entwined branches, he paused. The horse, sensing something, shifted restlessly. Gandalf whispered gently in Quenya, a calming song of still waters, and the beast stilled. Then, from the canopy above, something dropped. Not a beast, not a foe. A single black feather, long and fine, spiraled downward and landed across his knee. He picked it up. It was warm. He looked up. Nothing. Only the dense dark, layered like soot upon the stars. Yet he felt it again. That presence, not quite seen, not quite near. Watching. Waiting. The Nazgul did not yet ride. That much he knew. Their spirits were tethered, still quiet beneath the surface of the world. But there were others. Creatures once shaped by fire and command, now drifting, half-woken. It was not they who frightened him. It was what called to them. He pressed on. By dawn, he would cross the southern marches of Greenwood and make for the Anduin, where the great river whispered of time and memory. Beyond that lay the lands of men, scattered, quarrelsome, and blind to what now stirred at the edge of vision. He thought of the White Council, Elrond, Galadriel, Saruman. The name sat heavy in his heart, the head of their order, wise and learned, and yet too enamored with order and stone. He would not believe this threat, not until it screamed in his halls. And by then, Gandalf shook his head. He passed through a clearing where moonlight finally fell in silver pools upon the grass. There he dismounted and knelt. With a hand to the soil, he closed his eyes. What moves beneath you? What stirs in the deep places? The ground answered with silence, and then, faint, so faint it might have been imagined, a rhythm. Not a sound, but a pulse, slow, measured, like a drum beneath the world. He opened his eyes. It was beginning. As he rose, he glanced westward, toward distant Shire lands, where the fields lay soft and songs rose with smoke from quiet hearths. There, he thought, a flame still flickered, small and unknowing. He would go there, too, when the time came. But first, the council must be warned. His horse whinnied softly, and he mounted once more. No fanfare marked his journey, no banner flew, no army gathered, only a lone rider in grey, riding not from glory, but into the dark, where light was thinnest and hope but a whisper. Yet from such whispers, the greatest songs were born. It began with the trees, proud beech and silver-limbed birch, which grew sparse and bowed, their leaves, even in high summer, curled in on themselves, dry and grey-veined like old parchment. Then came the earth itself, cracked and strange, where roots dared not pierce and moss grew in twisted shapes. By the time Gandalf reached the southern edge of Greenwood, the air had thickened, not with fog or storm, but with a slow, stifling pressure, the kind that makes the lungs fight for breath. Even the birds fell silent again, and though the sun rose, it cast no warmth here. The light came pale and bleached, as though memory had drained it of colour. Far off, past the blackening hills, the tower stood, not tall, but cruel. Dol Guldur, the Hill of Sorcery. Once it had been an ancient watchtower, built by the wise to guard the southern vale. But in the long centuries since, it had grown darker, hungrier, a place where the roots of the mountain twisted into crypts and the stones themselves remembered screams. From his vantage atop a low ridge, Gandalf gazed upon it. He did not move. He did not blink. Smoke curled from the crown of the hill. Not fire smoke, but something deeper, more noxious. It did not rise. It lingered. Around the base, even the trees of Greenwood had turned against their kind, their trunks blackened, their limbs clawed toward the sky as though in anguish. Once, Gandalf said aloud, it was a place of light. His voice vanished, swallowed by the stillness. He remembered the tales, how Radagast, dwelling not far from here, had spoken of illness among the beasts, and how even the insects no longer hummed in summer's heat. The rivers had turned slower, the fish had grown blind. But now he saw it with his own eyes, and what he saw was will. This was no accident of decay, no ruin left to time. Dol Guldur pulsed with purpose, a brooding, watchful presence cloaked in ash. It listened. Even from afar, it seemed to lean forward, as if aware of him, as if remembering the footfalls of old enemies. He did not yet sense the necromancer directly. No voice whispered, no form appeared. But the shape of the shadow was there, not fully drawn, but gathering. He watched as a column of crows took flight from the northern wall. Dozens, black as soot, spiraling up and wheeling eastward like a cloak of wings. He marked their movement and frowned. Crows were watchers, messengers, carrion things, and they flew not in hunger, but in command. He felt it then, the faintest brush across the edge of his thoughts, a coldness that probed, curious and cruel, like fingers against glass. Gandalf narrowed his eyes. Not yet, he murmured. You seek, but you do not know me. The pressure faded. He turned away from the ridge and stepped behind the line of gnarled trees that marked the last threshold between Greenwood and the cursed hill. Here the forest was dying, but not yet dead. Enough life remained to shield him. From a pouch, he took a sprig of mallan leaf, a rare gift from Lothlorien, and crushed it gently between his fingers. Its scent, golden and clean, cut the stench of rot like a song. He whispered words in the high tongue of the West, not to challenge, but to warn. Then he buried the leaf in the soil at his feet, a small defiance in the face of dread. He would not enter Dol Guldur yet, not without preparation, not without knowing what he faced. But he had seen enough. The shadow was not myth. It had weight, it had direction, and worse, it had intent. He turned north again, wind lifting the edge of his cloak. Far beyond the mountains, Rivendell still stood, and the council would meet. Whether they would listen, he did not know. But truth had no master, and truth had returned. Behind him, Dol Guldur crouched atop the hill like a spider in its web, black stone veined with red, towers jagged and lean, windows like empty eyes. And in its halls, something stirred, not awake, not asleep, but waiting. Some were fashioned of iron and set with blackened hinges. Others, older, were mere clefts in the stone, breathing dampness and rot. But the true gate, the one that mattered, was neither of wood nor metal, but silence, the kind that seals the mouth of the earth, keeping in not beasts, but names. Gandalf stood before it now. The trees behind him had fallen away entirely. Only broken stumps and vines like coiled wire clung to the slopes. The wind was absent. Time, too, seemed strange here, as if the sun had forgotten its path. Above, the sky remained dim and colourless, though morning should have lit the east. Shadows lay in places they did not belong. He descended the hill's lower flanks slowly, his staff held low, touching stone and root as if speaking through them. No birds cried, no flies hummed. Even his horse, tethered far behind in a hollow beyond the tree line, had begun to tremble as he turned from it. The path was not marked, and yet he followed it. He did not need signposts to find the wound in the hill. It drew him in the way that grief draws memory, not by choice, but by pull. At last, the gate appeared. It was not grand, it was not tall. A jagged arch of stone, dark and weeping cold, yawned in the hillside like a mouth held open too long. From within came a chill not of winter, but of ages, the absence of warmth remembered only by those who once had it. Gandalf hesitated. The last time he had walked into a darkness such as this, it had been under Khazad-dûm, where fire slept behind stone and sorrow marked the ceilings. This felt different. This was not fire buried deep. This was shadow above ground. He stepped within. At once the light behind him faded, as though swallowed. The torch in his hand caught, casting pale blue flame along damp stone. The air was thick with age, not dust, for no dust dared linger here, but a kind of weight that clung to the skin and pressed against the ears. The corridor wound downward. Rough-hewn walls whispered moisture. Arched ceilings dripped in slow rhythm, each droplet echoing like a footstep of something unseen. Bones, small, scattered, littered corners, not fresh, not ancient, things that had crawled in, but not out. Gandalf walked without sound. His boots met no stone, but softened earth. He passed carvings, half-worn, half-defaced, elvish in origin, though now gouged and marked with black symbols. Spirals, circles with slashes, runes meant to confuse rather than speak. Magic of an older kind, not to call power, but to unmoor it. A door barred the end of the passage. Blackened oak rimmed with rusted bronze. No lock, no handle. He touched it, and it opened backward, not with motion, but with a gust of cold, and suddenly he was inside a hall, vast, round, and low, where the ceiling was hidden in smoke. Columns stood like tree trunks of obsidian, and in the center, a brazier burned without flame, its glow dull and red, casting no light. He stepped forward. At once, the sound struck him. Not noise, not voices, a hum, a vibration, deep and wordless, as if the mountain remembered being split by hammer and spell. It grew louder the closer he came to the center, not in volume, but in presence. Then he saw it, a figure, bound, slumped against the far column, robed, motionless, chained at wrist and ankle, its face hidden beneath a cowl, though long white hair spilled down one shoulder, matted with dust and blood. The chains were not dwarvish, nor orcish. They glowed faintly, elvish but broken. Gandalf stood still. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, as the silence held, the figure stirred, its head lifted, eyes opened, clouded, unseeing, but they fixed on him, and the mouth, cracked and dry, spoke one word, a name, older than this place, a name that should not be spoken. Thorin. And then the shadows stirred. The bound figure leaned against the obsidian column, bones sharp beneath ragged robes once woven of fine silver thread. His breath came in shudders, as if each inhale was a battle, each exhale a surrender. But he was alive, if such could still be called life, and when he spoke again, his voice trembled with an age too vast for pity. Do you bring release or remembrance? Gandalf moved slowly across the chamber, staff forward, light dull in the gloom. The hum within the stone had grown stronger now, more insistent, as if resenting his intrusion. I bring neither, he said softly, only questions. The captive gave a breathless laugh, a brittle sound that cracked like thawing ice. Then you have come too late, Grey Wanderer, or perhaps far too soon. Gandalf knelt. Even in shadow, he saw what remained of a once noble face, the fine elvish lines of cheek and brow, the long neck scarred by collar's weight, and the eyes, still, fierce beneath their clouded veil. You are no servant of Sauron, Gandalf murmured, though he did not look away. Not now, but once. The figure inclined his head, and for a moment, in the curl of his lip and the lift of his chin, the truth emerged, not from confession, but from memory. I was a king, he said, once, long before your towers were stone, before your rivers had names. Gandalf nodded, and now, the prisoner looked away. Now I am a warning. The chains shimmered faintly in the brazier's non-light. They pulsed with runes that flickered and twisted, not as language, but as cage. This was no mere prison. This was containment. His bindings were carved with symbols that sealed thoughts, not limbs. You are elven-kind, Gandalf said at last, but touched by something else, a line forgotten. I am of the Lost House, the captive whispered. The Eastern Stars, we who did not return to the West, but wandered deeper. Gandalf's breath caught. Few remembered the eastmost elves, the Avari, those who refused the summons of the Valar and vanished into the dawn of time. Fewer still knew their fates. Some had become wild and secret, others corrupted. The prisoner's gaze returned to him. I did not choose to serve the dark, not at first. I was offered light, a new flame, golden and terrible. He came not as a tyrant then, but as a teacher. Gandalf's voice dropped low. He, Sauron. No, said the prisoner. Not then. Myron. That was his name before the masks, before the lie became the truth. He came in silver robes. He spoke of order, of beauty, of shaping the world to match his song. The wizard felt the old name like ice in his spine. Myron, the admirable. That was how the Maya had once been known, long before forging rings or bending kingdoms. He taught us to bind stone, the captive said, to bend metal to thought. He opened the wells beneath the mountains and said, "Here is fire that sings." And we believed. His head bowed, and so we sang with it, and the world screamed. Silence. The brazier flickered then, faintly, not with heat, but memory. A flicker of towers fallen, forests burned, the echo of cities no longer spoken of. Gandalf leaned closer. "Why are you here? Why now?" The prisoner raised his chained hands. "Because I remembered what he is. Too late. I fled his service. I tried to speak of what was coming, and so I was taken, not to be broken, but to warn." His voice dropped to a whisper. "There is something beneath Dol Guldur. Not Sauron's full form. No, not yet, but a shadow of will. He pours into it like ink into cloth. It moves when he dreams. It waits, and it listens." Gandalf stood, his heart beat heavy now, not with fear, but with certainty. "He seeks form," he said. "He gathers strength through whispers and wounds, not in armies yet, but in sickness, in sorrow, in silence." The prisoner looked up, his face lined with light and ruin. "You are the first who has come," he said, "and perhaps the last who will leave." The stones trembled. It was not loud, but it was unmistakable. The hum had changed. It now throbbed with rhythm, like breath or heartbeat. Gandalf turned toward the passage. "You must be freed," he said. "There are still those who remember the truth of the world." The prisoner shook his head. "Number. To break the chains would be to loose what sleeps in me." Gandalf paused. "Then I will return, with light enough to bury this place forever." He turned, cloak swirling, but the captive called after him, "Beware the white. Not all who shine serve the light." And then the room fell still. As Gandalf stepped into the corridor once more, the walls pulsed once, low and slow, as if something vast and dreaming had exhaled from the stones themselves. And behind him, the captive king whispered a name, one that had not been spoken in 1,000 years. The path back through the black corridors of Dol Guldur did not welcome him. Though Gandalf had traced each stone with his staff, though the passage twisted as before, something had shifted. The walls felt closer, the air colder. Where once water dripped, now came the rustle of cloth on stone, soft, uncertain, but near. He did not hurry. Haste was no ally in such places. Dol Guldur had teeth, but they closed not with speed, but timing. As he neared the arched entrance through which he had first passed, he paused. His hand tightened around his staff. A voice, not sound, but presence, unfurled in the air before him like smoke. It did not enter through the ears, it entered behind the eyes. "You are far from the west, grey pilgrim." Gandalf stood still. It was not a voice he knew, not in form, but the weight of it, the bend it placed on the world, that he knew too well. Not full, not formed, a shadow of will. He turned, slowly. The hallway was empty, but the shadows along its walls thickened, and from them bled a shape, indistinct, tall, robed in a darkness deeper than black. It had no face, no hands, no heat, but it leaned towards him, as if drawn to light it, both desired and despised. "Why do you walk my halls unbidden?" the voice asked again, low and sweet as decay. Gandalf's staff glowed faintly at its tip. He met the empty space where eyes might be. "These halls were not yours when they were carved," he said, "and they will not be yours when they fall." The shadow gave no reply, but the stone beneath Gandalf's feet pulsed once. Not a quake, but a breath. Then came a laugh, not cruel, but confident, the sound of someone who believes he has already won. The west forgets, the north slumbers, the elves weep and sail. Men kneel to coin and crown. What is left to stand against the tide? Gandalf's eyes burned. Memory stands, and fire, and those who would rather die than kneel. Then kneel you shall, the shadow said, and it began to move forward, not walking, but spilling, as if it were poured from some unseen vessel. The light at Gandalf's staff flared, white and sudden, cutting across the passage. The shadow recoiled, not with pain, but resistance. It hissed, and the walls themselves groaned in protest. Gandalf raised the staff, voice rising in the tongue of the Eldar. The words were not a spell, but a command, not to harm, but to remind the world who still bore fire from the west. The shadow stilled. For a moment, only the hum of the deep stone remained. Then came the voice again, quieter now, yet deeper somehow. "You do not know me, Maya. You knew one who came before, clad in silver, bright with wisdom. But I am changed." The voice darkened. "I have learned, not from flame, but from silence, from rotary, from grief." The passage seemed to narrow. "And you have grown soft beneath stars and pipe smoke." Gandalf stood unmoved, but within him something stirred. Recognition. This was not Sauron in full, but a shade of him. A breath flung westward from the east, testing the bounds. He raised his staff again, firmer now. "I do not fear what has no form, and I do not speak with shadows cast by cowards." The figure stilled. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the shadow folded. Not fled, not banished, but withdrew, slipping back into the stone like a breath drawn inward. Only the silence remained, and the smell, faint but unmistakable, of ash. Gandalf walked now, faster. He emerged from the gate into grey morning. His lungs filled again with air that carried wind and rain. He felt the ache of his limbs, the weight of the cold. But behind him, something watched still. Not a body, not a voice, but intent. For the necromancer had seen him, and now knew him. The storm did not arrive with thunder. It came in stillness. As Gandalf stepped from the rotted mouth of Dol Guldur, he found the forest waiting, not as friend, nor yet enemy, but as something listening. The trees did not sway. The wind did not pass. The sky, pale with morning, held still like a breath before battle. But beneath the earth, something stirred. The shadow that had spoken now moved in truth, not just in thought, but in presence. Dol Guldur was no longer watching. It was reaching. The birds fled first, not in panic, but silence. Their absence was louder than any scream. And then the ground beneath the twisted roots began to warm, not with fire, but with hunger. Gandalf moved quickly. He crossed the blackened glade, the faint shimmer of light at his staff's tip glowing like a firefly in dusk. The horse he had tethered had broken free. The rope snapped, the prince leading north in wild haste. He did not call after it. For now the trees moved, not their trunks, but their limbs, creaking low and bending unnaturally, not in wind, but in obedience. Vines coiled across the forest floor, roots lifted where none should shift. The very wood had begun to wake, but not as living things should. Gandalf turned. Above the hill, Dol Guldur darkened. A great column of shadow now rose from its crown, reaching skyward in slow, twisting ascent. The smoke did not rise. It spiraled. At its heart, unseen but undeniable, a will coiled in its ascent, like a hand closing into fist. He planted his staff into the earth, and he spoke. Words not heard in that place for an age, not commands, not spells, but remembrance, the names of stars, of rivers now lost, of songs sung when the world was young and unscarred. His voice rang like clear bells in fog, cutting the gathering weight. The ground beneath him cracked, and a shape emerged from the dark. It was no man, no beast, a formless fire clothed in darkness, yet bright with rage, a phantom of will cast by the necromancer to do what shadow alone could not. It had no face, but its mouth opened, and it screamed. The trees bowed, the hills shuddered, and Gandalf raised his staff high. From its tip, light burst, not blinding, but remembering. Golden white, like the first light of day upon snow, it spilled into the clearing and struck the form before him. It hissed, recoiling, but did not fall. The scream grew deeper, more shrill, and tendrils of dark smoke lashed toward him, striking the light, crackling, folding around it. The staff quivered in his hands. This was no duel of power. It was a battle of truth. The shadow had no form but lies, and lies cannot stand where truth is named. Gandalf stepped forward, one step, then another. He began to chant, not in anger, but in sorrow, the lament of Elbereth, Queen of the Stars, whose name no servant of the dark could endure. The fire shadow writhed, its form pulsed and frayed, its limbs thinned, and then, in a final burst of shrieking wind, it collapsed, not defeated, but banished, called back to the will that had sent it. The glade fell silent again, but not whole. The trees were still twisted, the earth remained black. The tower stood, watching, but the light had been kindled, and the shadow had retreated. Gandalf lowered his staff and breathed. He felt the weariness then, not of body, but of spirit. Light had a cost. Naming truth in a place that had buried it for centuries was no small act. He turned from the clearing and made his way north, past the places where song once lived, through the deadened woods now watching him with wounded eyes. He did not look back, but he whispered as he walked, "They know now, and so must the others." For Dol Guldur had revealed itself, and so must the West answer. Yet as Gandalf stepped into the long-forgotten shadows of Rivendell, the rustle of his grey cloak echoed louder than any minstrel's harp. Though the air remained sweet with pine and ancient cedar, though the river still sang beneath the stone bridges and the stars shone upon polished marble, a new weight had fallen across the valley. Even the wind that curled through the open halls seemed to listen. Elrond met him beneath the white branches of the courtyard tree. The Lord of Rivendell wore no crown, only the silence of long wisdom and a gaze deep as the sea. At his side stood Galadriel, radiant, grave, her light veiled, and Saruman, robed in white, his brow furrowed, lips tight. No horns had sounded, no messengers had gone forth, yet they were waiting. The White Council had gathered. Gandalf did not speak at once. He stood before them and cast his staff upon the marble floor. Its tip rang once, a hollow, echoing chime. Then he drew from his robes a small black stone, veined with silver like cracks in ice. The stone hummed. Even Saruman's eyes flickered. "This was buried beneath Dol Guldur's gate," Gandalf said, "laid into the rock like a seed." Galadriel's hand hovered over the stone, but did not touch. "It is not of elven craft." "No," said Gandalf, "nor dwarvish. It is shaped of thought, not fire, a vessel for presence, a way for will to reach beyond walls and speak without voice. And what did it say? Elrond asked quietly. Gandalf raised his eyes. It knew me. It named me. A hush settled over the council. Saruman spoke, his voice smooth as snow over blade. A conjuration, a game of shadows. We have heard such warnings before. I walked its halls, said Gandalf. I saw what sleeps beneath. A lesser spirit, perhaps, Saruman countered. A ghost drawn to ruin. But Sauron perished with his tower. His form was lost. The ring is gone. Galadriel said nothing, but her eyes, blue and unblinking, held Gandalf's. He turned to her. The shadow is gathering, not openly, not in battle yet, but in desire. Dol Guldur breathes again, and it remembers its master. Still she was silent, but a wind moved through the leaves above her, though no wind stirred elsewhere. At last, she spoke. Did you see him? Number. But I felt him. Not whole, not risen, but returning. Saruman's robe shifted as he turned. Even if true, what would you have us do? Burn the forest to chase whispers? Muster armies to fight smoke? Gandalf stepped forward, staff in hand once more. I would have truth acknowledged, he said, before it becomes flame. Elrond looked between them, between wisdom and pride. The north is fractured, he said. Men turn inward. The dwarves do not stir from under stone. Even the elves dream of the sea. Then we must be wakeful, said Gandalf. Not when the fire falls, but now, when only the match is struck. There was a pause, the kind that stretches not from indecision, but from fear of its absence. Galadriel broke it. There is one place he cannot yet reach, she said. One place he fears, though he does not yet know it. Gandalf turned to her, and in his eyes a glimmer returned. The Shire. A soft smile touched her lips, though her voice remained solemn. There, the world has not yet bent. No shadow walks, no crown rules. It remembers laughter and innocence. Saruman scoffed. You would fight the return of Sauron with pipeweed and poetry? But Elrond's gaze had not left Gandalf's face. You have a plan? Gandalf nodded. Not yet a plan, but a path. The dwarves stir in the east. Erebor dreams of gold. And in the Shire, there is one who listens to old stories still and wonders if they are true. He gathered his cloak. This shadow does not rise in towers. It rises in hearts, and so must we meet it there. Saruman said nothing more. His eyes shone with frost. Galadriel watched him with ancient knowing. As Gandalf turned to go, Elrond's voice followed him. What shall we call it? This thing you faced? Gandalf paused at the edge of the stone hall. He did not turn. He simply said, the voice of a master not yet crowned, the breath before the flame, the necromancer. And he stepped into the dusk. The wind blew colder from the north now, whispering down the lonely mountain's flanks, as if bearing secrets from beyond the grey mountains. The ravens had grown restless, and though no dragons stirred yet in the deep caverns of gold, the stones remembered fire. Gandalf stood once more before the great gate of Erebor, his breath misting in the chill, his staff a lone gleam in the grey dawn. Before him, the carved doors bore the scars of war, not fresh, but not healed. Runes still shimmered faintly along the arch, guarded by eyes hidden in the shadowed walls. A horn sounded, low and short. The doors opened with the groan of stone, remembering movement. Two dwarves, mailed and stern, stepped forward with axes crossed. One lifted a lantern. It caught the silver glint of the wizard's beard. Again you come, Mithrandir, the guard said, without warmth. What tale weighs upon you now? Gandalf smiled faintly. Only one that waits to be finished. They let him pass. Erebor was a world of firelight and echo. The forges rang even at dawn. Gold gleamed in guarded vaults, but the halls did not hum with joy, only with intent. The dwarves had prospered since their return, but it was the prosperity of survivors, strong, proud, wary. At the high table of Thorin's line sat Dain Ironfoot, king under the mountain. His beard was braided with steel. His crown was plain but worn with pride. His eyes, sharp and tired, narrowed as Gandalf approached. "You come unbidden," Dain said, "but I have learned not to send you away. You bring ill news more often than good, but always truth." Gandalf bowed. "Then I shall not flatter." Dol Guldur stirs. The shadow in the south rises again, and it does not rise alone. Dain sat back, fingers drumming the table. "You believe it is him?" Gandalf nodded. "Not in full, but in will. He tests our sleep, and he does not forget gold." The dwarf's face darkened. "You think he will send his creatures to our gates once more?" "Not yet," said Gandalf. "Not by armies, but he will whisper to the greedy. He will stir the lost, and he will seek to poison strength before it awakens." Dain was silent a long time. Then, "You ask us to fight shadows. I ask you to prepare," said Gandalf. "The north is scattered. Men of Dale, elves of Mirkwood, they each keep their own counsel, but a fire is coming, and it will not ask whether they kept to their borders." Dain frowned. "Elves, they remember too well, and forgive too little." "All the more reason," said Gandalf, "that someone must begin the speaking." He laid a map upon the table, old, marked in places where roads no longer ran, where forests had swallowed old trade paths. Upon it, he had drawn new lines, a ring of gathering, quiet roads, hidden allies. Dain studied it. "You think it will begin again," he said. "Another war." "It has already begun," Gandalf answered. "Only not with swords, yet." The Dwarf King rose and walked to the hearth. His gaze lingered on the flames. "My people will not be the first to die for the memory of men and elves." "No," said Gandalf, "but you may be the first to stand, and so the first to be remembered." Dain turned. His face was stone. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Send your messengers," he said, "to Dale, to the forest edge, even to the Elf King in his halls of stone and leaf. Say that Dain of Erebor will speak." Gandalf allowed a small smile. "Then perhaps the fire can be slowed." But as he left the throne hall, he felt it again, faint but present, a chill from beneath the stone, where even dwarves did not tread. Dol Guldur's voice had not reached the lonely mountain yet, but its echo had, and the gold beneath Erebor, though silent, remembered the dragon's breath. There, the roads were still lined with hedgerows, heavy with rosehips and blackberries. The hills rolled green and slow under skies so vast and gentle, they seemed to have never known storm or sorrow. Smoke rose from round doors and crooked chimneys, not as signal, but as comfort. The soft grey spirals of breakfast and pipeweed, of stories by the hearth. And among the hills, beneath the hill, was a door painted green, with a shiny brass knob exactly in the middle, bag end. Inside, all was warmth and wood. Maps lay folded in drawers. Teacups clinked gently in their hooks. And in the study, by the open window that overlooked the West Farthing fields, sat Bilbo Baggins, barefoot, coatless, and humming to himself as he reread a letter he had written but not sent. It was the third time that morning. "My dear Frodo," he read aloud, "if ever you should wish to see elves, and I dare say you might. Keep your eyes open in the autumn dusk. They like the wood smoke then. There's a whisper about them, I think. He chuckled. Needs more poetry. Outside, the garden thrummed with bees, and the old oak tree cast dappled light upon the path. It was a perfect day, as most days in the Shire were. Not perfect in grandness, but in sameness, in the sacred ordinary. Bilbo rose and fetched the kettle. The water simmered as he added a few stray leaves, not for healing, not for spell, but simply for taste. As he poured the tea, there came a sound he had not heard in many years, the soft clop-clop of hooves upon the road. Not a farmer's cart, not a milk pony. No, this had a weight to it, a purpose. He turned, heart quickening, and there he was, grey hat, staff, cloak dusted from long travel. "Gandalf!" Bilbo cried, stepping outside before the wizard had even dismounted. "Well, now, I wasn't expecting company, but you've come just in time for second breakfast." The wizard smiled, and it was not the smile he wore in council or shadow, but something closer to his true shape, ancient and kind. "I was hoping you'd say that." They sat in the garden with plates of bread and honeycomb, a pot of butter, and a dish of sliced apples. Birds chattered in the hedges, and Bilbo spoke of the postman's latest confusion, of a hedge that had overgrown into the lane, and of a particularly clever badger that had taken to stealing carrots. Only once did Gandalf glance westward, toward the setting hills. "You've grown quieter," he said. Bilbo nodded. "I think about things more, not always grand things, but still." He looked down at his tea. "I've been dreaming of mountains again, not with fear, but with a sort of itch." The wizard watched him closely. "And do you think the world beyond the Shire still remembers you?" Bilbo smiled. "I doubt it very much, and I'm not sure I mind." There was a silence between them then, not awkward, but weighty, as if the moment itself had meaning yet unspoken. At last, Gandalf reached into his robes and withdrew a folded scrap of parchment, old, browned at the edges, the corners curled. "I came to ask a favor," he said. Bilbo raised an eyebrow. "Not treasure hunting again, I hope." "No," said the wizard. "Not yet." He laid the parchment on the table. It was a map. Faint, rough, but marked. Lonely Mountain, Mirkwood, Dale. "I've been thinking of a journey, for others this time, but it must begin small, with stories, with memories, with names." Bilbo studied the map. "I suppose," he said slowly, "you'll be needing a few good handkerchiefs then." Gandalf laughed, a low, rolling laugh that startled a squirrel in the hedge. The light dimmed slightly as the sun dipped westward, but the garden still glowed, warmed by candles Bilbo lit from habit. And in the soft wind, Gandalf knew the shadow could not yet touch this place, but it would try. And when it did, it would find that in the smallest corners of the world, in a hobbit's quiet garden beside a pot of tea, there still lived a strength it did not understand. The smoke of autumn fires curled through the valley of Imladris, sweet with cedar and mountain pine. Red leaves swirled along the carved steps of Elrond's house, and silver lanterns shone through the twilight like stars lost in trees. Yet amid the peace of Rivendell, maps were unfurled, voices lowered, and old songs awakened not in joy, but in warning. Gandalf stood before a long stone table, its surface crowded with parchments, charts of mountain passes, lineages traced in elvish ink, runes no dwarf had read in 300 years, and at the center of it all, a small, worn scrap of paper marked with faded symbols, Thror's map, Elrond traced one pale finger along the edge. "The moonlitters speak true," he said softly. "The door remains, but it is closed still, sealed by time and pride." Gandalf nodded, "Which is why it must be opened by something else." He stepped back as the echo of boots struck the high stone stairs. Thorin Oakenshield entered, clad in mail beneath a deep blue cloak, his beard braided with rings of iron, his face darkened not by shadow, but by memory. He carried no crown, but the weight of lost kingship rested heavy on his brow. He glanced at the gathered scrolls with suspicion. "So this is the great plan?" he said. "Dust and ink?" Gandalf smiled. "And courage, but that part, I trust, you'll bring." Thorin stepped forward, gazing down at the map. His jaw tightened. "I have dreamed of this mountain every night since we fled it. I have felt the gold beneath my feet. I have heard the voice of Smaug in my sleep." He looked up. "But I will not go to reclaim a tomb. I will not lead my kin to another ruin." "You won't," said Gandalf, "if you do not go alone." A long silence. Then Elrond said, "Thrain spoke of a key. A secret kept until the last of his blood should prove worthy." Gandalf reached into his cloak and drew forth a small silver key, ancient, narrow, shaped with dwarvish cunning. It gleamed in the firelight, cold as memory. "I found it," he said, "in the dungeons beneath Dol Guldur." Thorin's eyes widened, but he did not reach for it. "You went there?" "I did," Gandalf answered, "and I found more than keys. I found chains and whispers. The shadow stirs again, Thorin. Erebor may yet be more than a throne. It may become a shield." A flicker crossed Thorin's face. Disbelief, then doubt, then something harder. Resolve. "And who," he asked, "will you find to follow me? Who would trade comfort for such danger?" 13, said Gandalf. "Dwarves loyal to your house, scattered but willing. They will answer. They already have." He stepped aside as footsteps echoed from the hall. Balin, white-bearded and thoughtful. Dwalin, axe already slung over his back. Then Fili and Kili, young and sharp-eyed. Others followed. Bifur, Bofur, Bomber with his heavy steps. Oin, Gloin, Ori, Dori, Nori. They filed into the room, not with pomp, but with quiet unity. Not yet a company, but nearly. Thorin looked at them. No songs were sung, no toasts raised. Only a single nod passed between him and Balin. Gandalf turned to the fire and lifted his staff. "We will set out at first light. The road will lead through forest and ruin, through songs forgotten and names no longer welcome. But if we reach the mountain, and if the door still opens..." Elrond's gaze grew distant. "There is a prophecy in the east," he murmured, "that when the halls of Erebor burn with fire once more, the shadow that once fled will rise again." Gandalf turned to him, and his face was solemn. "Then let it rise," he said. "We will meet it with flame of our own." In the hearth, the logs cracked, and for a moment, the light caught Thorin's eyes, and they gleamed like gold long buried. It clung to itself in vast mounds and flowing hills, a sea of metal shaped not by coin alone, but by goblets, crowns, scepters, chains, and blade hilts lost to time. Gems glinted in the gloom like stars caught in amber. The treasure hoard of Erebor, long untouched by dwarvish hand, lay in solemn, shimmering silence, and above it, curled like nightfall made flesh, lay Smaug. He had not moved in years, not truly. His breath, slow and cavernous, stirred the dust only once every hour, as if the mountain itself exhaled. One wing, vast and black-veined, stretched over a vein of gold that glittered, With his every exhale, his claws, long as scythes, twitched in sleep, as if his dream still clutched what his waking mind had long ago claimed. But tonight, something changed. At first, only a shift of weight, a ripple along his spine. One nostril flared, then came a sound deeper than wind, older than a voice, a rumble. Smaug's eye opened, not fully, but enough. Amber, slitted, and vast. He did not wake easily, nor often, but he felt something. A stir beyond the gates. A word, perhaps. A name not spoken in centuries. The mountain, which had once hummed only with his breath and the sizzle of molten gold, now pulsed with a second rhythm. He raised his head. The hoard shifted. Gold clinked like rain. A few gems tumbled from his flank and fell into a dark ravine with no echo. The dragon's mouth curled into something like a smile. Thorin. The words slithered between his teeth, dry and slow. He had known they would come, in time. The dwarves were cursed with memory and drunk with pride. They would never forget what was taken. They would never let go of what was no longer theirs. And when they came, he would burn the world into their lungs. Above, in the cold wind that curled along Erebor's heights, the ravens took flight, wheeling, silent, black against the stars. Snow dusted the eastern peaks. A pale moon stared through veils of cloud. But beneath the stone, the fire had woken. Smaug uncurled his tail, its spine tip dragging a trench through gold. He turned one great eye toward the southern tunnel. Dark, narrow, long forgotten. A trickle of wind entered from there, and on it, the faintest scent, pipeweed and pony, hobbit. The eye narrowed. Slowly, deliberately, he moved. Not quickly, not yet, but with purpose. The gold shifted, slid, collapsed, a sound like thunder underwater. Far above, in the chill of night, Thorin Oakenshield slept with his sword across his knees, dreaming of stone halls filled with laughter and light. But the mountain remembered another fire, and the fire remembered him. Beneath the darkening skies of Rhûn, the plains no longer slept. Once, this eastern land had whispered only with wind, tall grasses bending beneath moonlight, broken only by the hooves of wild horses and the quiet songs of wanderers too far from home. But now the wind carried no song, only marching, from the farthest edges of the Sea of Rhûn to the buried forges of Dorwinion. Black banners stirred. They bore no sigil, not yet, but their silence was more fearful than any device of fang or flame. And in the shadow of an old ruin, once a watchtower of Númenórean make, a host gathered. Not orcs, men, tall and gaunt, their faces hidden beneath veils of red and iron, their eyes darkened by ash and oath. The Easterlings, long silent, now rode in companies of 7. Their captains wore blackened mail, and upon their foreheads they bore a mark, not carved, not inked, but branded, a circle split by a vertical flame. It had no name, but it had a meaning. Servant. High upon the tower, a figure stood cloaked in grey and crimson. His armor was smooth as bone, his helm horned like a stag. He bore no weapon, but he was not unarmed. In his hand, he held a curved rod carved from obsidian, and around him the air shimmered faintly, as if the world recoiled from his breath. He spoke no command. He did not need to. The men below moved as one. Campfires sparked across the plain. Smiths struck anvils beneath stars. War drums, muffled now, throbbed like the early beats of a waking heart. And from the east came more. Cameliers from the red waste. Pale riders from the black dunes. Tribes bound by fear and prophecy. All drawn to the same whisper. A voice that had reached them not through messenger or might, but dreams. In sleep, they had seen a tower crowned in flame, a sword raised over a broken crown, a ring spinning in endless fire, and they had heard his name, not spoken, not shouted, but known. Beyond them, in the south, the dark land of Khand readied its chariots. Along the inland waters, ships black of sail but sleek of keel, trained in the dark art of silence. From Harad to the edges of Mordor's old bones, the smoke of readiness rose. The Dark Lord had not returned, but the world now acted as if he had. And elsewhere, in crumbling barrows untouched by sunlight, in the deep catacombs beneath forgotten cities, even in the bones of trolls long thought lost, the hunger stirred. The wraiths had not yet risen, but their shadows did. They moved like smoke in mirrors, seen only in corners and in fear. They whispered to grave robbers and kings alike. They bent the thoughts of weak minds. They gathered names, and each time a blade was drawn in anger. Each time a lie was spoken with conviction. Each time a heart turned away from the light, they grew stronger. Back in Rivendell, Galadriel stood alone upon the western balcony, her hand upon the stone rail, her eyes closed. She did not speak, but the wind braided itself in her hair, and far to the east, the fireless moon turned red, not with trumpet or war horn, but with the sound of boots on stone and breath held between heartbeats. Thorin Oakenshield stood before the shattered gate of Erebor, the rising sun behind him, casting long shadows into the ruined threshold of his home. The doors, once thrown wide by dragonfire and death, now stood ajar. The wind whispered down from the heights, catching the broken banners that still clung to the walls, tatters of gold and blue, the colours of Durin's line, faded but defiant. At his side stood Balin and Dwalin, armour polished, eyes bright. Behind them, 13 dwarves, each marked by road and fire, looked not forward to glory, but home. Their axes were sheathed, their hammers were strapped. It was not war they came to make, it was memory they came to reclaim. Gandalf stood apart, on the ridge above, leaning on his staff. The morning light caught the silver in his beard, but his eyes were elsewhere, fixed not on the gate, but beyond the mountain, toward Mirkwood's darkening edge. He felt it again, a pulse, distant and low. The shadow had not ceased, it had only turned its gaze. But Thorin did not look back. He stepped forward, through the archway, into the darkness of the mountain that had shaped his blood. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of ash. The torches they carried flickered, casting long, uncertain shapes on the walls. Every hall they passed had a name. Every corner held a memory. Here, the Hall of Feasts, now filled with rubble and the bones of collapsed chandeliers. There, the treasury vaults, silent, the gold within still gleaming but cold as the dead. And deeper still, they came to the great gallery of kings. The light of their torches caught the statues, towering figures carved in obsidian and granite, the long line of Durin's sons. Their faces, though cracked, still held wisdom, sorrow, pride, and at the end, above a stone dais, the last, Thror, broken crown, empty eyes. Thorin stood before it, silent. He removed his gloves. He placed his bare palm upon the cold stone of his grandfather's knee, and he whispered, "We have come home." The words did not echo. They settled, as if the mountain had waited. Then, far behind them, from the deep corridors they had not yet reached, came a sound like a sigh, a breath drawn in the dark. They turned, but nothing followed. Still, Gandalf knew. Erebor had been reclaimed, yes, but not cleansed. For deeper than any vault, beneath the very roots of the mountain, a shadow remained. Not Smaug. He was gone. But the echo of him, the greed, the rage, the sleeping fire, had left something behind. And the mountain remembered. Later, on the heights above the gate, Thorin stood beside a new forged banner, a plain blue field stitched in haste, bearing the mountain and the star. He looked out across the valley. Already, the news was spreading. Ravens flew. Smoke from campfires began to rise near Dale. Elves watched from the forest edge. Men from Lake Town murmured in taverns. The king had returned, but Gandalf did not smile. For while gold now lay beneath dwarvish foot, and axes hung once more upon Erebor's walls, the true danger had only moved, from halls of fire to halls of mind, and somewhere, far beneath the ash of Dol Guldur, a whisper turned in sleep. Beneath the hills of the Shire, in a quiet burrow lined with maps, buttons, and books, a simple gold ring lay wrapped in a handkerchief at the bottom of a wooden chest. It made no sound. It gave no glow. But it waited. Outside, the world turned as it always had. Smoke from chimneys curled lazily. Children played with hoops and sticks beneath apple trees. The marketplace in Hobbiton bustled with laughter and honey cakes, and above it all, the sky arched vast and soft, untroubled, untouched. Yet deep within that chest, beneath layers of linen and forgetfulness, the one ring stirred, not awake, but dreaming. And in its dream was fire. Across Middle-earth, the world moved unaware. In Gondor, stewards still lit the watchfires and muttered of ancient lineages. In the White Mountains, tombs remained sealed, but whispered in the dark. In the ruined fortress of Barad-dûr, long collapsed, the foundations groaned beneath the ash, like teeth waiting to bite again. But in the Shire, peaceful, untouched, unfearing, the past breathed still. Bilbo sat at his writing desk, quill in hand, the fire crackling beside him. He paused mid-sentence, gaze lingering on the window. The wind had changed, not cold, not yet, but thin, like something distant brushing against the edges of the world. He looked down. There, in the margin of his notes, he had idly drawn a circle, not large, not deliberate, a ring, unbroken. He blinked, then turned the page. "I do wonder," he murmured to himself, "if I'm getting too old for stories." But the stories were not done with him. For even now, the ring, small, plain, silent, began to call. Not loudly, not with words, but with need. It reached not with hand, but with memory, curling itself around thought, binding itself to comfort, to pride, to the warm ache of keeping something hidden. It had passed from dragon's hoard to halfling hand. It had been used once, a moment, no more, to vanish from sight, to slip past goblin and beast. But the act had rippled. Power called to power. And Sauron, though broken and scattered, heard it. Far in the east, in the dark halls beneath the blackened woods of Dol Guldur, a shadow paused. Its will, bound in smoke and memory, turned like a beast sniffing wind. Something had moved, not openly, not enough to follow, but enough to feel. Back in the Shire, Bilbo stirred the fire and wrapped his robe tighter. The chill was passing, he thought. Perhaps a storm was coming. He did not know, he could not know, that the ring he kept, tucked away and half forgotten, was not simply a trinket. It was the axis of the world, and though it slept still, it was beginning to remember its master. The White Council had not marched with banners, nor ridden with hosts. They came as flame comes to the forest, quiet, unrelenting, an absolute. Galadriel of Lorien, veiled in starlight, her brow like a blade, led the reckoning. Beside her came Elrond, crowned with the memory of the sea. Saruman came too, his robe still white, his voice still proud, though his gaze turned often toward the east. And Gandalf, grey-cloaked, weathered, quiet, stood before the gate that once hissed his name. No trumpet was blown, no challenge shouted, only a single word spoken in elven tongue, soft and sorrowed. Be gone. The wind rose. From the depths of Dol Guldur, a scream unfolded, not of throat or beast, but of will. The tower shook, stones cracked, black smoke billowed upward, unfurling into the sky like wings. But there was no shape to it, only a wound made air, a retreating spirit, furious and unformed. Galadriel raised her hand. A light shone from her palm, not burning, not blinding, but pure. The forest leaned toward it. The trees of greenwood, sickened for years, bent as though waking from a fevered dream, and the shadow fled. It did not fall. It did not burn. It withdrew. Eastward, southward, across the broken spine of Mordor's ruin, into darker places where no elf dared follow. Like breath drawn through a closing mouth, it vanished. The tower collapsed, not all at once. First the crown, then the western wall, then the gate, which crumbled with a sigh. When the dust settled, only stone and vine remained. No eye watched, no hand grasped, and the trees began, slowly, to green again. But the council did not cheer, for they knew this was not the end, it was only permission. Gandalf knelt beside the ruin, fingers brushing the blackened earth. The taint was gone, but beneath, deep down where roots do not reach, something had sunk. It would sleep now, yes, but it would dream. Elrond turned to Galadriel. Where has it gone? Her voice was quiet. To the east, it seeks strength in what cannot be named, but it will return. Saruman said nothing. His face was unreadable, but Gandalf saw the gleam in his eye, not of fear, but of interest, and that, more than any darkness, chilled him. They left Dol Guldur in silence, and the forest, not yet whole, but healing, whispered behind them. Yet far away, in deserts beyond maps, and in ruined temples beneath red sands, the smoke had already begun to gather. It had not been destroyed. It had been unleashed. There is a kind of silence that follows great storms, not peace, but pause, as if the world itself forgets how to breathe. So it was in the years after Dol Guldur fell. The forest healed, but slowly. Greenwood became Mirkwood no longer, though shadows still clung to the farthest roots. The spiders retreated, the pools cleared, birds returned, hesitant, their songs unsure. But the shadow had not died, it had merely recoiled. In Rivendell, Elrond penned a new chronicle. He wrote of fire and ruin and a tower broken by light, but he left blank pages near the end, spaces for wars not yet fought, for names not yet remembered, for hope not yet tested. In Lothlorien, Galadriel walked often alone beneath the golden leaves, her eyes fixed on a future she did not share. The mirror in her garden showed not victory, but paths, some green, some bloodied. One, most fragile, led to a door in fire. And in the Shire, nothing changed. Not yet. Bilbo planted late peas and wrote poems in the evening light. He told stories to children who half believed him and half dreamed them. He polished his buttons. He walked the same hill paths he always had. But the ring, hidden in its little box wrapped in old cloth, still called to him. Not loudly, not cruelly, just a gentle whisper, a promise that nothing must ever change, that no one must ever know. That quiet was the same as peace, and Bilbo, kind, clever, restless Bilbo began to believe it. Gandalf watched all of this from afar. He travelled the road still, north to Erebor, where gold no longer meant only death, south to Dale, where trade flowed again, even west, where no elves remained but memory. He moved as fire does beneath the earth, slowly, unseen, shaping the stone. For he knew the truth, that the war had not ended, it had not even begun. The ring was still hidden, but it was no longer lost. It had chosen, it had settled, and in that quiet choice, the world had turned, not loudly, not suddenly, but forever. Yet Gandalf did not despair, for amid all that stirred, the swords sharpened in silence, the banners painted in secret, the voices whispering from the east, he had also seen something else. Small hands, clear eyes, and a heart that would not yield. In time, that heart would walk into fire. In time, that light would fall. And in time, it would rise again. But not yet. For now, the world held its breath. And far away, in a garden, a hobbit laughed.